And that's where we are at the beginning of this battle. Everyone good? Ready to go? Should be fun. Let's go kill people. Not for real. I know, I know, let's go. It's like, Sherman said, homework. All right. This is the Battle of Alesia, also known as the Siege of Alesia. That is a fortified city in Gaul. And this is going to occur over a period of about 7 weeks in September of the year 52 BCE. We've already discussed what the precursors to this overall engagement. But what's going to happen is the Gallic tribes, using guerrilla tactics throughout Gaul, are going to try their best to not stand up to the Roman legions, rather to attack where the Romans are weak, attack their supply lines, attack Roman allied villages and things like that, which is a useful tactic, particularly if your numbers are inferior or if the enemy that you're up against is better tactically or more advanced militarily in some way. So what's going to happen is, because of the brutality of Caesar, the Gallic people are going to decide, let's band together. And they banded together under one guy. He was in his late 20s. He was about 28 years old. And his name was Vercingetorix. I've always pronounced it Vercingetorix, and so I might accidentally default to that. But Vercingetorix is a pretty epic Gallic hero and quite a military commander. And what's going to happen is Vercingetorix is going to amass a huge army. Now this is all of Gaul. This is a massive, massive potential army. And he is going to, after coming into contact with Caesar's forces, find himself in a situation where he didn't want to directly face the Romans on even ground, infantry versus infantry, because the Gallic soldiers were less well armored and less well disciplined. What the Gauls liked is they liked longer swords. They did often use shields, but they didn't like to go into battle wearing armor. They thought that it was more heroic to go into battle without armor. And they also had apparently really cool mustaches. And they liked to fight with a longer sword, and their job was to come down on the head of an enemy. The Romans were well armored. They had a helmet and they had the shield, as we've mentioned before. And the Roman tactic was often to hold the shield high and use the gladius, or the short stabbing sword, to kind of stab up at the enemy. So it's two different styles. You have the Gauls swinging like this, and you have the Romans stabbing like this, right? Two different styles. All right, well, what's going to happen is Vercingetorix is going to take his army, and at this point we know he had somewhere between 60 to 80,000 people. In this case, they're the ones in red. And Vercingetorix is going to find a fortified hilltop. And a fortified hilltop is a city, in this case, that has a wall around it, like a big fortress. And he gets up on the high ground here. These are rivers around, there's woods all around the battlefield. All right? He puts himself inside here because it's a good defensive position. The problem is, even though there's provisions here, there is food, there's also a whole bunch of villagers living in here. Right? And so that could be a problem logistically for the Gallic warriors. All right. What's going to happen is Caesar wants to bring Vercingetorix to the field. So he's heading this way with his army, which is about the same size. He is superior in infantry, not in numbers, but in discipline, but inferior initially with cavalry. So what Caesar does is he buys Germanic mercenary cavalry. He buys good horsemen from somebody else. And the German cavalry is very good. And so they're here. All right? Vercingetorix is here. The Romans are here. Now, here comes your first question. Question number 1. All right? Ready for this? All right? Just get your ideas in your head. All right? Vercingetorix has a few options at this point. A, if you want to write them down, you may. It doesn't matter to me. Or you can just think about it. All right? A, he can attack the Romans before they form up. And there's a fear that if the Romans can form up and utilize their siege engines, they might be able to knock down the walls. So maybe Vercingetorix should attack them first before the Romans have a chance to attack. All right, that's A. B, should Vercingetorix hang out here, just sit back in his well-defended position and await reinforcements? Because there are a lot of Gallic reinforcements potentially out there just waiting for word. Right? Or should Vercingetorix launch guerrilla raids and attack other Roman outposts in order to draw Caesar away? If he could maybe use his cavalry to go out and attack other areas, maybe he could cause Caesar to move or go somewhere else, and then he doesn't have to fight here. Right? What do you think? A, B, or C? Think about it.
This is an interesting one.
Again, if you want to write them down, you can. It doesn't matter to me. Now we have question number 2 before anything happens. Right? We have 2 commanders both trying to figure out what to do. Question number 2. Right? Julius Caesar. He is ahead of about 10 legions. Right? And what he is going to do is he is approaching this situation. He does want to bring the Gauls to battle. He wants to end this war. All right? And so what's going to happen is this. Number 1, does Julius Caesar, or A, does he launch a direct assault onto these fortifications? Romans are well known to be very good siege technicians. They could possibly take out these walls. Should he launch an attack before these guys get reinforced? That's A. Launch a direct assault before the enemy is reinforced. All right. B, should Julius Caesar just say, you know what? I'm going to surround this area and I'm going to lay siege to these guys. I'm just going to try to starve them out. All right? But here's the thing, just so you know, in both of those situations, whenever you're attacking an enemy who is defending or is well entrenched, or in this case, well entrenched, defending, and up a hill, you want to have at least a 3-to-1 numerical advantage. Caesar does not have that. They're basically at parity, meaning they both have about the same number of troops, so the advantage is going to go to Vercingetorix. It just does. Right? Or C, should Caesar hold Vercingetorix in place, like leave troops here to keep him here, and then use his cavalry or troops to attack German villages and attempt to get them to give up and maybe join the Roman side? What do you think, A, B, or C? It's interesting. Here's what's going to happen. Vercingetorix decides, I'm going to stay in place. Yeah. For him to leave a well-defended position and go into an open field with the Romans would be stupid. It's not a good idea. So he's going to sit back and wait. He's got to get reinforcements somehow. Right? So that is what he did. Right? The second question, what does Caesar do? if Caesar launches a direct assault, it's probably not going to work, more than likely. Even if it does work, his troops are going to suffer incredible casualties. It's not worth it. He has to have an intact army if he's going to control Gaul. So he doesn't choose a direct assault. All right? He's not going to hold Vercingetorix in place and run all over the place. Right? He's not going to do that because he wants to get to them. He wants to keep them here. He wants to fight them. So what he decides to do is he is going to lay siege to Alesia. And the way he's going to do it is actually amazing. He's going to set up a series of fortifications around this city, right? And here's what he does. He takes walls and builds interior walls all throughout here. Oops. That looks nice. Right? And these walls are going to be used by him to keep these guys in. And he builds like little mini forts throughout this whole section, right? And then he can put his troops here. And he has watchtowers. He's walled them in. Now these guys in here will find it hard to get out. And the Romans can lay siege to them. But what's the problem with this? Does anyone see a problem with the Romans being out here? What do you think? Please set me up.
Weren't there reinforcements?
Yes! There are a lot of reinforcements out here. All right? So, what does Caesar do? Do you know what happens?
He builds another wall around his original wall.
I said that.
He's going to build another wall around his original wall. Absolutely. So what he does is he has a wall looking this way, and then he creates another wall out here. And there's where it's an issue. All right? Facing the other way. And what he does with his troops, this is the genius. He places his troops throughout here. All right? Inside this double wall. And they can look in or they can look out. And he creates also a system of trenches. And these trenches that they built are on both the inside and the outside, making it difficult for anyone to attack. And while they're building this, these guys, Vercingetorix, can see this. He's like, wait a minute, they're building walls. And so he would try to sally out or go out and try to mess with the soldiers. And so basically what Caesar did is his soldiers were in full armor and they had shovels or they had axes and pickaxes. They'd go out here, grab lumber to build the fortifications, and they would build these trenches. Some of the trenches, they actually diverted water from the river to create a moat to make it impossible or less likely that these guys are going to be able to easily attack the wall. This is a huge undertaking. Now this is a big deal. The inner wall was about 10 or so miles long. The outer wall had to have been at least 15 miles long. And inside it, the Roman troops, there's not a lot of them, but the Roman troops could move pretty quickly because they did have some cavalry forces. So you could actually run horses around here. Right? And you can move your infantry pretty quickly. Well, this is a big deal. Vercingetorix now has a real problem. He's stuck in here. He's running out of food. So what he does is he makes a military decision. He sends the old people, the women, and the children outside of his walls. Why would he do this? Yeah, why?
Well, like, the soldiers have to eat, and maybe Caesar's not going to kill all of the...
Yeah, who's going to kill women and children?
Right.
All right, exactly. So Vercingetorix sends the women and children out, and they head out here looking to the Romans. And they're like, hey, can you let us out, or can you feed us? There's a lot of us. And Caesar forbade that. And so for about 7 weeks, outside here, you had women and children visibly starving. And the Romans are like, it doesn't hurt us. But boy, did it make Vercingetorix feel pretty bad. So what Vercingetorix has to do, he's like, I got to get my support. And so while these guys were constructing, while the Romans were constructing the palisades and the walls, he sends his cavalry out. And they break free. And they're going to run away, and they're going to meet up with the other Gallic tribes. And they're like, we got to get together. We have to band together. And they're actually going to form an army that was supposed to be about 240,000 men strong. 240,000 men strong, according to Julius Caesar. He wrote the history of the battle, by the way. Probably not, probably closer to 100,000 people. Doesn't matter. That is a massive army. 100,000 people, this massive relief force about 7 weeks into the siege is going to show up. And in order to make it easier, they're going to show up here. All right? So what you have is a large group of cavalry. This is a group of archers, bowmen. It would actually be a heck of a lot bigger than that, right? There's a lot of Gauls, and they start to launch an attack once they arrive. When they start their attacks, what Caesar does is he moves his soldiers to respond. So guys over here that aren't doing anything, you move them here. No problem. And so you can defend the wall. The guys defending the wall are throwing their little javelins, the pilum that we've talked about. They're throwing these at the enemy. And the cavalry charges up to try to break through. And day one sees the Roman cavalry jump into the action. So the Roman cavalry right here breaks out. They attack here. And smart, what the Gallic cavalry did is they started backing up. The Roman cavalry, the mercenaries, are going to move forward, and what are they in the range of? What are these guys? Archers. And so all of a sudden, the Roman cavalry is hit by arrows. This is a smart tactical move by the Gauls. And so the Romans back up. They have to. They rush back here. Eventually what's going to happen is they're going to swing back over here and attack these archers. Right? Cavalry versus archers in a straight up battle, cavalry wins. And so the Romans rush through here, kind of mess with the archers, and boom, day one is done. Roman cavalry runs back here, and these guys are pretty much undeterred, but they just couldn't break the siege. While this type of stuff is happening, Vercingetorix is inside. He doesn't know what's going on. He can't see outside. He has no clue what's going on. So when he hears battle, what he will do is launch raids outside, right? Which is smart. So if there's a battle going on here, Vercingetorix can launch an attack here, or here, to really draw off the Romans. So the Romans are going to have to rely on discipline in order to keep themselves defended, because there's a heck of a lot fewer Romans than there are Gauls. So it's going to take a lot of discipline and a lot of military command. During the night, the Gauls are going to back up, and they're going to launch a concerted or a huge attack just along this wall. And it almost worked. When they did this, Vercingetorix attacked here. And it really looked like this was going to be the end of the battle. a guy named Mark Antony, who became eventually Julius Caesar's right-hand man, and we've talked about Mark Antony before, he is going to lead these attacks, the defense rather, and he is going to stop it. And so it doesn't work. Right? The Gauls cannot break the Roman defenses. Right? So the siege continues. All right. Eventually what's going to occur is Vercingetorix looks around at the situation, and he sees that there is a possibility that up here there's a position that he may be able to exploit, because there's a river, there's high ground, and there's a possibility that the Romans may not be able to defend this. So he's going to shift his efforts to that area. Right? And this is going to be the final point of the battle. What's going to happen is this. The thrust of the Gauls comes here. A massive cavalry assault, and there is a, whoops, that'd be the wrong color, a massive cavalry assault here. Wow. Vercingetorix sends his troops there so they can make a breakout. He also sends his troops here to break in, and here. So he's attacking the wall here. From outside, he has the cavalry coming here, and there's a massive group of infantry right there. The Romans are extremely outnumbered at this point. And it looks like it's working. As a matter of fact, the Gauls eventually break into the Roman fortifications. So you have Gauls inside the wire, basically. They're in here. The Romans then have a choice. And this is question number 4. All right? Because I skipped number 3. Did you guys notice that?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I talked about it. All right. What question number 3 was going to be, just so you guys know, is the options for Vercingetorix. Should he send out cavalry to get help, which is what he did? Should he launch a cavalry attack? Or should he leave the fort at night to continue guerrilla tactics, which had been successful in the past? Right? He's going to send out his cavalry to get help. All right, but I forgot that. So question number 3, because when I edit this, no one has to know that I skipped question 3. All right, but I just said that. All right, Vercingetorix currently is doing everything right at this point. What can Caesar do? What's happening is Vercingetorix guys, the relief force from the outside is streaming in. They're into the Roman fortifications. From the inside, they're attacking. Right? Caesar is in an impossible situation. This is a situation, if you were to look at it, you're like, well, it was nice knowing Caesar. Right? Number 1, does Julius Caesar break out and live to fight another day? He could do it. Open the gates, retreat, run away. Disciplined, which he could do, they could leave in a disciplined manner, throw up another fortification, which only takes a couple of hours, and they could defend themselves. Option. Probably an option I would take at this point, running away. B, they could break in and take the town. Forget that. Jump in, take the town, and you can defend it. Right? That's B. Or C, could Julius Caesar personally take command of his soldiers while deploying his cavalry in an effort to attack the enemy where they don't expect it? Right? A, B, or C. What do you think? It's not looking good. here's what happens. Caesar decides, I'm not going to break away because I'll look weak. And then the Gallic warriors will come together under Vercingetorix and they'll eventually annihilate me. Can't do that. If I break in and take over the city, I'm still stuck. And I don't have supply lines because they'll be blocked. They can use my own fortifications against me. That's not going to happen. I'm going to take command of the army. And so he throws on his red cloak, which is a symbol of command, and he pushes himself into the battle. And it's interesting because between himself and Mark Antony, the Roman soldiers all of a sudden feel this amazing sense of possibility. They stop defending. They'd been sitting there with their shields, throwing their pilla or their javelins, which is more defensive. And now they draw the gladius and they move forward. This is going to catch the Gauls off guard. The Gauls are like, wait a minute, we're winning. What are these guys doing counterattacking? At the same time, what's going to happen is Caesar is going to take his cavalry and he's going to swing them around to attack the Gauls from the rear. So you have your Gallic soldiers fighting, going, hey, wait a minute, they're starting to fight back really aggressively. Hey, that's Caesar. Hey, he looks amazing in his cloak. And they're fighting, and all of a sudden behind them they look and they're like, oh my, they're at our rear. And what's going to happen is it's going to throw the Gauls into a sense of panic. It didn't have to, but they weren't as disciplined as the Romans. The Romans pushed through here, forward, right? Where their numbers, the lack of numbers didn't count as much because they're in confined spaces. And the Romans are disciplined. They're crushing the troops here. These guys freak out and they run. They run. The guys that are inside, Vercingetorix's original troops, rush back into town. He's lost all of the reinforcements. They're gone. The next morning, Vercingetorix talks to the rest of his men, and he says, here's what we can do. I'm going to talk to Caesar, and I'm going to say, number one, if I'm dead, will you leave? Like, if my own people kill me, will you leave and leave my people alone? And we'll surrender, we'll quit. Or, if I give myself to Caesar personally, is that something that we could do? And they talked about it, and they finally decided that Vercingetorix should show up to Caesar. And so the next morning, Vercingetorix, in his armor, shows up to Caesar, apparently rode around him like 6 times on a horse, and then gave him his weapon and surrendered. The reason he did this is Caesar said, I will let the rest of your tribe go. Caesar wanted to use them eventually. They were great warriors. He wanted to use them for his own. And he didn't want to really anger them, or they'd never be an ally. So he takes Vercingetorix back to Rome and keeps him there as a prisoner for about 5 years until they publicly execute him. Caesar wins the battle. We don't know how many people the Gauls lost. We have no idea. We do have an idea of how many people the Romans lost because Caesar's going to write an epic retelling of the battle. 12,800 Romans probably were lost in this siege and battle. We don't know. According to Caesar, it was 240,000 Gauls were killed, which would mean that all of these people that were on the battlefield apparently brought their wives and children to be slaughtered also, because that's more people than were on the battlefield. But it doesn't matter. It was a tremendous victory for Julius Caesar against odds that he should not have been able to prevail against. What's going to happen is a 20-day celebration in Rome in honor of Julius Caesar. A heck of a lot of jealousy, as we talked about before, in Rome. And within 2 years, Caesar is going to march his victorious armies across the Rubicon, and eventually he's going to be involved in a civil war for control of Rome itself. All right. Kind of an interesting battle. How'd you guys do with the questions? How many people got most of them right, do you think? That's pretty good, actually. How many people got about half of them right? Because there are only 3, so it's hard to get half. But how many people would have absolutely lost the battle? All right. I think this is an interesting one, personally.